why did the Spanish Habsburgs join? Because the Austrian Habsburgs are in the war already. So I would say, I mean, and really just about everybody is involved in the 30 Years' War in some capacity or another. The thing is that, like, even England is involved to some extent, but then again, England's got its own problems at this time. So in the later years of the 30 Years' War, in the later years of the 30 Years' War, England is fighting its own civil war, and so that's why England's not really doing a whole lot. But as far as that goes, the Austrian Habsburgs and the Spanish Habsburgs are united. Also, Spain. Another thing we have to remember is, all right, no problem, Nora. Another thing we have to remember is that Spain was at the time already fighting a war in the Netherlands, because part of the Peace of Westphalia in 1648 was that the Netherlands are recognized as independent. The Netherlands, while other people are fighting the 30 Years' War, the Netherlands were in like the last phase of what they call the 80 Years' War. So they'd been fighting for their independence from Spain. So that would be another reason that the Spanish Habsburgs, I mean, they've still got policy goals. And so when you think about that, it's not like the Habsburgs are like, even though Charles V was the last one that united all the Habsburg stuff, they're still pretty close. Okay. All right. So as far as that goes, one thing that I would say is that the role of the Spanish Habsburgs in the 30 Years' War is not something I would expect to see on the exam. All right. So I can tell you that. Now, remember that unless the book that you're using for your class is something like this is Chris Freiler's AP Achiever text, which I'm a big fan of. Now, Chris Freiler is an AP European history teacher. Okay, so he's been teaching he's been teaching this class for like 25 years. And so the thing is, this is written like according to the concept, like it's fleshing out the concept outline, and it's really aimed at like this class in the exam. Now, if you're using a standard garden variety college textbook, okay, so you're using a McKay text, which the thing is that the McKay text, it's a good text, but it's not written for the AP European history exam. So that's one thing that, unless you're, now if anybody doesn't have a copy of AP Achiever and you can, you've got 20 or 30 bucks, now don't buy it on Amazon right now because it's ridiculously high, but just you can go to the publisher's website if you go to McGraw-Hill's website, but this book is written with the exam in mind. So this is where we don't want to get so caught up, and I think this is very, very important for AP Euro, is that, well, and the thing is, though, that this isn't really a social history thing. That is what I would like. That's kind of the interesting thing about this, Donna, is that I'm kind of surprised that they're getting so like deep into the 30 Years' War per se. So don't get too much in there. Now, what's going to be important for the AP European history exam is going to be the role of France and Cardinal Richelieu and politique and that sort of thing. So as far as that, yes, Nora, your teacher is going to focus, it's going to tell you this is what's important. So what I would say is important about the 30 Years' War, don't distinguish between the Austrian Habsburgs and the Spanish Habsburgs. Just remember that they've still all got common interests. It's not like they're antagonistic toward each other, but it's really the Bourbon French that you're seeing there, and Cardinal Richelieu, who's making a pragmatic decision to get into the war versus the Habsburgs, because they realize that France is a Catholic country, but France's interest is really served better by allying with the Protestants. And that's really where and this is the other thing that I think is important, that the 30 Years' War is a turning point. Okay, the 30 Years' War is a turning point because you're getting to where by the end of the 30 Years' War, people are starting to think less about what religion are you or what religion is your country, and more about what is my country's national interest. And it's kind of setting up the age of absolutism because Louis XIV, while he's into one king, one law, one faith, he's still chiefly about like France, not just as a Catholic country, but France as a powerful country. So yes, definitely go with your teacher on that, and just don't get too caught up in stuff that's ultimately not going to matter on the exam. Like, for example, Wallenstein or whatever, it's a written test, right? But as far as Wallenstein, this is somebody that, I mean, I mentioned him in my lecture, I believe, but at the same time, he's not going to show up on the AP European History exam, like as far as a question where you'd have to know who he is. So unless we're taking like a class, like if you were doing a study or writing a paper on the 30 Years' War, then that would be something. You know, there may be a class somewhere that somebody teaches on 30 Years' War. I'd kind of like to take that. That sounds like it'd be kind of cool, but it's not going to be emphasized on AP. No, but the thing is, it's not that it sucks, because like when it comes down to it, any textbook, any college level textbook is going to have stuff in it. Okay, so well, every textbook has stuff in it, right? But what they do is these books, like what happens in a college level class. Okay, let me explain this to you. It's nothing wrong with your book. So like the Kagan text, the Kagan text is a good text. Now my 10th graders have trouble reading it. It's not as readable. I find that Spielvogel tends to be regarded as the most readable of the text. But the thing is, whether it's Kagan, whether it's McKay, no matter what text it is, if it's written for a college level thing, they put a lot of details in it, because in a college class, the professor doesn't lecture on everything or emphasize everything, but the stuff that they do emphasize, they want it to be in the textbook. So when somebody's writing a college level textbook, they put everything in the kitchen sink in there. But the thing is, that's not what this exam's about. And so that's why a book like Chris Freiler's AP Achiever, which is written for the exam. And now AMSCO is also, which I love AMSCO's U.S. history text, because that's written with the exam in mind. I believe that they're putting out a text for AP European history pretty soon. Chris Freiler's AP Achiever book, let's see, McGraw-Hill AP Achiever. Okay. Let me see if I can find you a link here. Okay, so this one here, I can go ahead and get you, I'll send you a link here. And it looks like the price is at like $24 plus shipping or whatever. Yeah, Amazon is not a good one for this book. Okay, for some reason they've had a lot of trouble with Amazon. But yes, I'm very excited to see what AMSCO puts together. But at the same time, I think it's hard to get better than Chris Freiler when you're doing something like this. All right. So as far as that go, we've got that. But Nora, I'm glad you asked that question, because I think that that's something that's very important for AP students to understand, that your textbook is not the end all be all when it comes to this stuff. All right. So as far as that goes, now Loza, the Age of Walpole. Okay, now Walpole was a British prime minister, and I'm going to just be real. Like I'm about to, Google this, and really just to prove a point, because my point is that it's not going to be on the exam, okay? Because Robert Walpole was, I knew that he was a British prime minister. So he was a British prime minister between 1721 and 1742. Now that is that's a pretty long time for somebody to be prime minister. But another thing that I'm seeing here is it says that this is actually the first, he's the first prime minister, okay, generally regarded as the de facto first prime minister of Great Britain. although exact dates, da 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 da. Okay, so as far as that goes, he was, he was just, now it says, yes, holds the record as the longest serving British prime minister in history. Now, what I would note here, that this is something that is not going to be on the exam. Okay, so when it comes down to it, I don't think that that's necessarily going to be on the exam, so I wouldn't focus on that. So that's the other thing, is just to remember that there's stuff that's going to be emphasized on the exam and there's stuff that's not, and your textbook does not distinguish. Okay, so John, as far as your question about a prep book, a review book, now it's not absolutely necessary. Now, I think that if you've got $30 on hand and you really want to make a 5 on this exam and you're going to use it, okay, like I would never spend money on a review book. I would never tell somebody to spend money on a review book just to have it. Okay, that would be something that if you're on this thing, if you've got a review book just to have it, then it's not really doing you any good. So think about that. Would you use it? And the advantage of a review book like Chris Freiler's AP Achiever or something like that is that it's written for the exam. That when you're reading that, you know that everything in there is important. Like anything in there is something that has a good chance of being tested. So I hope that that's something that that helps y'all. But yeah, it's something that's designed for the exam, to review for the exam, is gonna be helpful. All right, so as far as that stuff goes, okay, now let me look at these Reformation questions, and then we'll go on there. But yeah, I like how we've got a nice little cross section of teachers and students in here tonight. Can I summarize the diet of worms? Okay, certainly. So it looks like here we've got more people on the Reformation than anything else. All right, and remember, ladies and gentlemen, go ahead and let me know if what it is. I've got a few more questions, and y'all keep the questions coming. If you've already asked a question, ask another one, because this is great. Now, the diet of worms. Okay, so what happens here is when Martin Luther, 95 Theses, all of that kind of stuff, he is summoned to the diet of worms. Now, this is basically an imperial council, is what this is. So, Charles V calls together an imperial council that is going to decide what is going to happen to Martin Luther and what should we consider him. Now, this is something, because what we need to remember, and the role of the printing press is something that cannot be emphasized enough, because before, all right, it was a similar thing that had happened to Jan Hus. Jan Hus, who had been in Bohemia, the same place where the 30 Years' War kind of started out. So Jan Hus is over in Bohemia, and he's got some ideas that kind of diverged with traditional Catholic teachings. And so Jan Hus was summoned before an imperial diet, an imperial council. And he was told that he would have safe passage, that he would be granted safe passage to and from the council. Now, that ended up not being a thing. Okay, that they ended up, even though they promised him safe passage, he ended up, when he was pronounced guilty, he was burned at the stake, and they kept him over there. But Charles V makes the same guarantee to Martin Luther, says that you are summoned before an imperial council at Worms, or Worms, however they said it, but luckily for us Americans, it's a written test. So you are summoned before this imperial council. And so Luther, and he's promised safe passage, which is kind of an interesting thing, because if you don't get safe passage, then you're not going to show up, because it's like, why would I show up if I'm found guilty? They're just going to burn me. But Charles V says, look, I'm serious. Okay, I don't have my fingers crossed, see anything like that. Come on, Luther, it's going to be safe. So basically, Luther goes to the Diet of Worms, and he makes his case before Charles V. And at the conclusion of this, Luther is pronounced guilty. He is outlawed. He is somebody who is working outside the law, and Charles will not give official sanction to what Luther is doing. Now, the thing is, though, Charles does keep his word, and Luther, well, he was found guilty of heresy. And so he's a heretic because he was speaking against, because what Luther's saying here is that if salvation is attained by faith alone, remember that the Catholic Church, now it's a little more nuanced than this, okay, because one of the most common fallacies that I encounter, and that's where a lot of people only know their own religious tradition. This is a unit that can be kind of tough for people, especially people who don't come from like even a Christian background, to get some of this stuff and the little bitty things that Christians have fought over the years. But what you see here is that, remember, the Catholic Church says that somebody is saved by God's grace through faith. But since the Catholic Church believes in free will, then a sincere faith is going to be confirmed by good works, okay? Just like if your boyfriend or girlfriend says, oh, I love you so much, but then they're always cheating on you, or they're always saying things to you, they're insulting you, they're not being kind to you, they're not spending time with you, but they say, oh, I love you. Well, eventually you come to the conclusion that they don't love you. And so the Catholic Church says that you are saved by God's grace through your faith, but if your faith is sincere, then you are going to produce good works. Now, the Council of Trent said, and they were very clear about this, that if someone says that a person can be saved by their good works, and that's it, like their own good works can save them, let them be anathema, that they let them burn in hell, because a person can't save themselves through good works. So Luther, though, is saying that somebody's faith does not need to be confirmed by good works. And so he is going against the teachings of the Catholic Church. And also Luther, in his ideas of the priesthood of all believers, he says, selling indulgences, okay, but not just that. I mean, well, not okay, right? But selling indulgences is wrong. But Luther, in the 95 Theses, goes a step further. And he says that we don't even, like, what even gives the Pope the right to forgive sins in the first place? So it's not just that the indulgences are being sold, but what about so it's not just indulgences are being sold, but Luther says the Pope doesn't even have the right to forgive sins, which that's something that, of course, the Pope claims having this right from Peter, who traditionally, according to Catholic tradition, was the first bishop of Rome. And so Luther is going against the teachings of the Catholic Church, and he is proclaimed a heretic and an outlaw. Now, the thing is that Charles, unlike his predecessor in the situation with Jan Hus, he actually does give Martin Luther safe passage and tells Martin Luther, you can go ahead and you have 2 weeks, basically a 2-week head start. Now, if we catch you, then you'll burn at the stake. But then he goes to Frederick of Saxony. Now, one other thing that's just a funny story to do with the Diet of Worms, that when Luther made his case, that when he finished, he got back to his room and somebody had like this big old stein of beer for Luther, and it said that Luther downed it in one gulp because he was just so tired from everything that he'd done that day. That's just an incidental story. But Luther goes then to Frederick of Saxony, and Frederick of Saxony was one of the electors of the Holy Roman Emperor, like kind of a big deal. And so what happens here is there are some of the princes and nobles in the Holy Roman Empire, which, remember, was really like, it was a collection of like 300 some odd sovereign principalities that were under the symbolic leadership of the emperor. Now, Charles V, all right, so what happens here is that Charles V was a Catholic, and he made an effort to make sure that the Holy Roman Empire was going to remain Catholic. Now, this is a survey level course, so I don't know a whole lot about the fighting that went on before the Peace of Augsburg, but luckily you don't have to know anything about that, okay? But there were some conflicts because Charles V, the emperor, saying that Martin Luther's an outlaw. Frederick of Saxony says, I'm kind of a big deal and I'm protecting him. And so there is uncertainty about, will Protestantism be tolerated in the Holy Roman Empire and in what way? So finally, the Peace of Augsburg, and if I'm not mistaken, like it's in the 1550s, 1560s. It's a few decades after Luther, but the Peace of Augsburg comes to the conclusion: whoever reigns, his religion. All right, whoever reigns, his religion. And so they say, basically, the Holy Roman Emperor is saying, I am giving up any kind of say in how each of the individual princes in the Holy Roman Empire manages their domain. That if the prince is a Lutheran, then then the people in that domain will be Lutheran. If the prince is Catholic, then they'll be Catholic. Now, remember, this isn't people being able to pick personally their own religion, because if the ruler, if that's his religion, then everybody's going to be in that religion. So whoever reigns, his religion. Now, after the 30 Years' War, this is expanded to include Calvinism. And so that's something that in the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, Calvinism is added as a third option in the Holy Roman Empire. Now, remember, the other thing about the Peace of Westphalia is that private worship. Okay, so they're saying that we're not going to harass people who are worshiping privately. So if there's somebody where the local ruler is a Lutheran or a Calvinist and somebody's a Catholic, but they're not making a show out of it, and they've got like a little congregation, but there's not a visible Catholic church, and they're not making a big deal, leave them alone. So Charles V, he tried to influence the Reformation in terms of trying to promote Catholicism in the Holy Roman Empire, but it didn't go, it didn't go along. Now, another thing I would say, though, is that in 1527, Charles V's army went into Rome and they just pillaged it, all right, because the Pope had tried to create an alliance against Charles V, like to get Charles V out of northern Italy, because Charles V, he had domains everywhere. I mean, when you look at a map of like all of his stuff, which that's probably not a bad idea for us to do right now. Okay, so let me just take a quick look at Charles V and see where I can find this map, if that's on the Wikipedia page or it's somewhere else. It may be somewhere else. Let's see. So Charles V. All right, and if I could, okay, there we go. Let me go ahead and share my screen real quick. Well, that's if this thing will come up. All right, so yes, let's go ahead and visit that. All right. Oh, come on now. All right. Okay, let me get that screen share going. Oh, no. All right, there we go. Okay, so as far as that goes, Charles V was king of Spain, all right? So he was king of Spain. He had these islands here and then in southern Italy, which was part of Spain at the time. That was part of the Spanish holdings. Then he had some principalities here. Now you can see where he's got this land here in northern Italy. And then he's got some stuff over here and over here. And then, of course, this is what he's got as the ruler of Austria, and then also ruled Bohemia. So actually a lot of personal holdings in the Holy Roman Empire, and then some holdings out here as well. Also, the Spanish Netherlands here that he's got, and then some other principalities here. He was also the Duke of Burgundy, so he's got some land there. And so the Pope thought, I can get Charles V out of northern Italy. So he allies with England and France and some other people, the Venetians and all of that. And that doesn't end up going that well. Charles V ends up just teaching the Pope a big lesson. Well, a few years later, then Henry VIII wanted to divorce his wife, Catherine of Aragon, who just so happened to be, wait for it, Charles V's aunt. And so when the Pope was like, okay, I don't want to tick off Charles V, so he tells Henry, no, you can't divorce your wife. or I mean, not divorce, but remember an annulment, because the Catholic Church doesn't grant divorces. They only annul marriages that are void and for some reason weren't legitimate. So basically, because of Charles V, Henry VIII can't get an annulment. And if it hadn't been for Charles, like that's why Henry VIII is so triggered by this, is because he just wasn't expecting the Pope to just tell him no. I mean, he's a king. If a king can't get an annulment, who can? And so basically, part of the reasoning behind this was the Pope didn't want to tick off Charles. So Charles kind of indirectly influenced the Reformation on that front as well, because he is, basically that starts the English Reformation, because the Pope didn't want to tick off Charles V. All right, so going to be done answering questions now. Emily, how long have you been teaching Euro? Let's see, how long have you been teaching Euro? Just kind of curious. That's always helpful when I'm talking to someone here. So the question is, how much of my first year. All right, thank you, John. And so the thing is, you don't want to spend your absolutism unit's already packed. You don't want to spend too much time on him, okay? And so the thing is, it's really up to you, okay? This is really, as far as what I mean, this is just the sum total of like teaching this for a decade. I've come to the conclusion that when I'm not doing what I want, then I'm miserable. And so if you're enjoying teaching, Louis, spend some time there, because your students are going to enjoy it too. But if you're like, you know what, I don't want to spend too much time on them short other people, then there you go. But I get tired of feeling like I'm jumping through hoops all the time, and that I've got to rush through something I like to get to something I don't like. And because we never really know what's going to be on the test any given year anyway, that it's really just, I mean, the exam's just a game of Russian roulette. I mean, I wouldn't tell somebody to spend like a whole month teaching absolutism or something like that. But I would just say that in this case, like, make a decision and decide which one interests you the most, and which one, which absolutist is somebody that you're using to, as an illustration. Like for me, Louis XIV is kind of like a model absolutist. And I teach Peter the Great, of course, as well, because I just think Peter the Great's awesome and all of that kind of stuff. So now, one thing I typically will short, like Austria. I don't talk about Austria very much. One of these days, I need to learn a little bit more about Austria. I've actually got an Austria t-shirt. They've got an amazing looking eagle. But at the same time, I just sometimes leave that out. So I think that as a teacher, I think it's important to be talking about what you like, because if you find it interesting, your students are going to find it interesting. And another thing, and so the thing is, if you want to focus, which I think as Americans, like focusing on the Stewarts, I think that is a very important time for the development of like American philosophies of government, which, really a lot of it's borrowed from the English Bill of Rights. So I think when you're teaching students who are Americans, I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with emphasizing that material. So, and also I've got a video on Louis XIV. I've got a 3-part video on Louis XIV's wars. And one thing I've found as a teacher, like typically when I'm looking at score reports, even if I'm looking at a year that my students didn't do that well, there's seldom a time when I look at a score report and I'm like, this is a motivated student who didn't pass, like an intelligent, motivated student who didn't pass the exam, because there's so much material online now. So I don't consider myself primarily responsible for whether my students pass or fail. You see that there are students here. Like the thing is that students that are here, they're investing time outside of class. And so, I mean, if you think that, hey, I want to get to some other stuff, direct them to some of the other resources that are out there. It's like, hey, I'm not going to talk about Louis XIV's wars in class, but Tom Ritchie's got a video series on that. Feel free to listen to that. A little shameless self-promotion there. So yes, I think that's great, because one thing is that's for sure is as a teacher you can't do it all. So you have to make those choices, and the exam is not comprehensive. That's the biggest thing that I think kind of drives some of my decisions, is that the exam is not comprehensive. Like year to year, it's going to be different. So you never know what's going to be on there. It's just kind of like just random stuff. All right. So as far as that, hopefully that helps. Okay, yeah, but I think really, when in doubt, do what you want. I think is important. As long as what you want is something that's actually like got some kind of chance of being on the exam. All right. Can I explain the Marburg colloquy? Now, the thing is, this is another thing. I'm getting a lot of questions. Are these all coming from the same group of students? Because this is something I've heard before, but it's not coming to me like, okay, so this is, oh, I know what this is. I just didn't know what it was called. Okay. So what y'all are calling the Marburg colloquy. Okay. Y'all are using like the official stuff. Feel free to say like the debate between Martin Luther and Erlich Zwingli. All right. Now I've got a video on transubstantiation where I think I talked about this a little bit. But this is really going into the difference between the Catholic view of the Eucharist, okay, when we talk about the Lord's Supper, Holy Communion, what happens to the bread and wine, okay? So most Christian denominations have some kind of ceremony like this. I mean, whether it's Catholic, Presbyterian, Baptist, Methodist, Mormon, there is some type of expression of Holy Communion, the Lord's Supper, the sacrament, the Eucharist, whatever people call it. And so the Catholic Church has the view of transubstantiation. So when the priest is performing this ceremony at the altar, that the bread and the wine are not just being blessed, like they are becoming the body and the blood of Christ. Take, eat, this is my body, this is my body broken for you for the forgiveness of sins, and that sort of thing. Now, Jesus said this. All right. So when Jesus was in the upper room, he told his disciples, take, eat. This is my body. Now, some English teachers might say it's metaphor. All right. It's just he's being symbolic. But the thing is that the Catholics say, Jesus said, this is my body, and who am I to argue with the Lord Jesus Christ? And so that's the Catholic viewpoint, transubstantiation, which means it changes substance. Now, Luther and Zwingli are having a debate, because when at the beginning, it's like, can there be a single Reformation movement? Now, the thing about this Marburg colloquy that's important is that it establishes there can't just be one Reformation movement, that there are going to be a lot of different Reformation movements, because they can't, this is in the 1520s. So it's 1529, about 12 years after Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the door of the church in Wittenberg. So as far as that, that Luther and they wanted to have some kind of like, we're going to what do you call it? Yeah, we're going to see if we can unite Protestantism. And so Luther says that Jesus said, this is my body. Well, it's not really turned into a body or whatever, or blood, but since Jesus said this, he must be somehow present. Okay. He must be somehow present in this. And so what happens here, he says that, like, that Christ is spiritually present in the Eucharist. And then Zwingli says, no, it's just a metaphor in remembrance of me. Like people who are Baptist, like if you think about like the Lord's Supper table, that Baptist, in a Baptist church, it says, in remembrance of me. Okay, so Zwingli says it is only a memorial. Christ is not physically present. Christ is not spiritually present. The bread is bread, the wine is wine, and that's it. Luther says I can't do that. Sola scriptura, it says in the Bible, this is my body, this is my blood. So it must have some meaning to it other than just to remember Jesus, okay? That must have some other deeper meaning to it. So that's what happens, though, is that Zwingli and Luther go their separate ways. They're not able to they're not able to do that. Okay, so that's the significance of that Zwingli and Luther cannot agree on the Eucharist. All right, so if this isn't too much, all right, now the thing is, I would say, Kyle, that now I need to do some more research and do a video on the Dutch Revolt sometime. But this is not something I'm going to tell you, it's not something that's going to be heavily emphasized on the exam. So the Dutch Revolt, the 80 Years' War, all of that, this is something like it's not going to be a big thing. But what we do want to note is that what we could see on the exam, and I've seen questions that go with this, Philip II was a Catholic zealot. All right. So Philip II was just a huge proponent of Catholicism and wanted to stamp out any kind of dissent. Now, in the Netherlands, there were a lot of Protestants in the Netherlands, and especially in the northern part, which is today the Netherlands, like the southern part of the Netherlands, which is today Belgium, was more heavily Catholic. But there are a lot of Protestants, and Philip II wanted to persecute these Protestants. And so this became like a thing that this is really part of the reason that this war started, was that Philip was going after the Protestants. Now then you've got this 80 Years' War and all of that kind of stuff, and eventually it's just been a little while since I've gone over this, so I'm sorry I'm a little bit shaky on it, but it's not a huge thing. It's not something that I would expect to come up, because the Dutch Golden Age is something that's going to be more likely to come up here. So I would say that knowing that Philip II was a Catholic zealot, that's something that is important. As far as the compromise, the pacification of Ghent, I would not expect to see any of that on the AP Euro exam. Probably something. Now, Kyle, what textbook are you using? I would be curious if you're running into this kind of stuff. You're using the Kagan text. Okay. And so the thing is, I mean, it's good to know about this stuff, but it's not something that is going to weigh in very heavily. Knowing that the Dutch fought for their independence, and knowing that part of it is because of the influence of Calvinism, and the Dutch basically developed this more tolerant culture because they're more concerned about business. And especially when you look at what's going on in the Netherlands, it's just better for everybody to just kind of like, what, we're going to sort of look the other way. If somebody, let people practice their religion in private. If somebody's a Jew, who cares? That sort of thing. Because we want to do business. We want to live alongside each other. Whereas Philip was trying to enforce Catholicism in the Spanish Netherlands the same way he was that he was trying to in Spain. So, but I wouldn't get too deep into the weeds on that. All right. What are the Catholic? Okay, so the Edict of Restitution. Let me make sure that I've got this. I tell you what, y'all are really asking some impressive questions. Okay, yeah, and sometimes when I tell, because really it's a survey level course, and that's something that we want to make sure that we've got there. Now, as far as this goes, okay, so the Edict of, I knew this was during the 30 Years' War, but is this right before? Okay, so this is basically, okay, so this is before. Okay, all of this was overshadowed when okay, so this is right before Gustavus Adolphus landed. Okay, so this is after the second phase. The Edict of Restitution is after the second phase of the 30 Years' War, Nora. And so, as far as that goes, what you're looking at is after the second phase of the 30 Years' War, the Protestants had been so thoroughly like demolished that the Catholics, as far as I remember, without getting too deep, because this is something I would not expect to see on the AP Euro exam. Let's see. So, trespass in the region he considered his own. Let's see. That basically, okay, so belated attempt to restore the religious and territorial situations reached in the Peace of Augsburg. Let's see, it impeded this. Okay, so no further Catholic lands could be legally transferred to. Okay, so essentially, this is something that they're trying to keep any more like places from becoming Protestant and to keep things as they were at the Peace of Augsburg. Now it's no big deal. It's better, Nora. I'm going to tell you, it's better to know too much than too little. It's better to be asking questions but it's just understanding that this is the time where, like, okay, so to answer your question, it's not that you're studying the wrong stuff, so to speak. There's nothing wrong with having a deep knowledge of this stuff. But the thing is what were they fighting about? Okay, so what happens is the first two phases of the 30 Years' War. And so this is something you do need to know. Okay, so it's not like you're like way off or something like that. What you do need to know is the first two phases of the 30 Years' War are very big victories for the Catholics. All right. So the Catholics have had very big victories, and this is all fought within the Holy Roman Empire. And so then Gustavus Adolphus lands in the Holy Roman Empire, okay, from Sweden. So when Gustavus Adolphus comes in, this changes things, because what happens is now this war that had been largely fought over religion in the Holy Roman Empire, now Gustavus Adolphus is landing and he is going to fight with the Protestants. And so this really, I would say more so, definitely. But Gustavus Adolphus, now there are two things like in the DBQ about the 30 Years' War. It goes into some of this stuff. But this, like, what you see is definitely Gustavus Adolphus had political and economic interest in helping the Protestants, but he was also really kind of coming in as a defender of the Protestants. And so now this is turning into basically a continental war, because France, they realize that what Gustavus Adolphus is doing is actually helping French interests. Like, Gustavus Adolphus is going in there and he's fighting against the Habsburgs, which is going to weaken the Habsburgs, and the French are like, let us help you. And so that's where the French start allying themselves with the Swedes, and it becomes a continental war. So no, the Edict of Restitution did not fix everything, because it was basically an edict of victory for the Catholics and for the Habsburgs. So it's like the Habsburgs at that point, they're tightening their grip on the Holy Roman Empire, and the French and the Swedes are like, yeah. I mean, when we hear restitution, that's really, it's basically a big setback for the Protestants, and that's part of what brings Gustavus Adolphus into the war. And then, of course, remember the French, they've got really kind of a purely political aim to kind of undermine the Habsburgs. All right. So, but yeah, good question. And so remember, it's not, I mean, you're reading about the right stuff. It's not a big deal. It's just sometimes it's like something like the Edict of Restitution. Here's something that, if this is something you remember, you can use this on a DBQ or an LEQ or something like that. Okay. So the Edict of Restitution is perfectly valid. One thing that I want to be clear about is that basically the multiple choice is governed by the concept outline, that the things that are in the multiple choice typically have some type of, they appeared somewhere in the AP Euro concept outline course description. Now, when it comes to a DBQ or an LEQ or something like that, then this is actually something where any evidence you produce about the 30 Years' War is valid. Okay, so I don't want you to feel like, oh, I'm studying the wrong stuff. I mean, if you've got a great knowledge of the 30 Years' War and European history in general, I think it's going to serve you well. Even though a lot of the stuff that, there will be sometimes when people ask questions, you can see it. I'm like, let me refamiliarize myself with that, because I'm not like a complete encyclopedia on all things European history, nor should I be. And, we've got at least one first-year teacher in here right now. So it's like, Emily, I've been doing this a long time and I've still got stuff that I'm shaky on, and it's okay, because it's a survey level course and it's not, we don't expect people to know everything. Okay, so as far as that, the mercantilist policies. Now, I've got a video on mercantilism where I explain the policies kind of from the French perspective. Now, mercantilism, remember that the idea behind mercantilism is that the wealth is measured by silver and gold. So that is the first part of this, okay? That wealth is measured in silver and gold. So if I want my nation to be wealthy, then my nation needs to have a lot of silver and gold. Now, at that time, the Spanish had a lot of silver and gold, and people wanted to be like that. And so what you need to do is you need to have colonies, and you need to trade within the colonies. So France had Louisiana, they had Canada, they had Saint Domingue, which is today Haiti. So remember, sugar, ladies and gentlemen, if you're writing anything down, which I would encourage you to have like an actual pencil and paper when you come to these online sessions, so that you write things down that are important. But sugar was the biggest commodity that was traded at that time. Okay, so sugar was the most, and that's why when you think about the Caribbean, it's got all kinds of different, you've got islands that used to belong to Spain, used to belong to Britain, used to belong to the Netherlands, used to belong to the French. Everybody had possessions in the Caribbean because that's where you grew sugar. And so sugar was the most important crop in these, at this time, it was the most profitable. And so as far as that goes, that the French had a sugar island, they had furs in Canada, and they've got some raw materials coming out of Louisiana. So what you see happening here is they're trading to try to, now what they don't want to do, they don't want to import stuff, because when you import, then what happens is that you end up, so when you import, you have to give up gold and silver to take in those imports. And that's the issue that you see come from there, is that you don't want to give up that gold and silver. And so I don't know if I would say that it's absolutist versus constitutional, because now there are other things, like in U.S. history, for example, like Britain had the Navigation Acts on the books. And of course, their attempts to, now they didn't enforce them, but the British attempts to enforce mercantilism on their colonies ended up being one of the driving forces behind the American Revolution, because this whole thing with mercantilism, like, you have to buy this and you have to buy that. And so Louis XIV is giving out like monopolies and all of that kind of stuff. Now the Dutch, and this is something, I think I'm smarter than the average bear when it comes to Dutch history, but there is some stuff that I need to brush up on. And so the thing is that the Dutch, really developed a reputation for having like the best shipping rates, and they were implementing something that was much closer to the laissez-faire that we're going to see Adam Smith promoting. Now, remember, when Adam Smith published Wealth of Nations, he didn't do so in a vacuum. The Dutch are kind of showing that the mercantilist assumptions aren't necessarily working, because the Dutch are doing something that is much closer to free trade. Now, an economic historian might take issue with some of these things, but I wouldn't. Now, I would say yes, absolutists definitely practiced mercantilism and perfected it. But I think that most of the countries at this time are using it to some extent or another, because even the Dutch have their colonies and stuff like that. But what happened, see, Americans, like when you look at the American Revolution, a lot of the controversy was because the British wanted Americans to pay taxes, or American colonists to pay taxes on stuff that was coming in from other countries, it was usually the Dutch. It was usually that what sugar is going to be cheapest? Dutch sugar. Like the Dutch were able to ship things more cheaply than anybody else. And so people wanted to trade with the Dutch because they were getting the best prices. And so that's kind of the sticking point. But I don't know if I would make that an absolutism thing, even though I would say that absolutist states, since they're built on centralized regulation, I think that's why France was able to put together like a really solid mercantilist economy, because they had the ability to regulate, because they've got that system in place. Whereas the Dutch, it would have been more difficult to set up that kind of regulation, because they've got these 7 provinces and all this kind of, I mean, it's really an interesting, in my video, What is a Stadtholder? I go into the complexity of the government that exists in the Netherlands. So I would say that does make like strict economic regulation it makes it a little bit of a, makes it a little bit tough there. So hopefully that helped a little bit. Some of these things can be, like I said, I've been doing this for 10 years and I'm still trying to figure some of this stuff out. Now, what I see here when I'm looking at what people are studying this week, a lot of people still studying the Reformation, okay? And then some of you study, it looked like 10 votes for absolutism. We've got 3 studying something else. 1 studying the scientific revolution. Now, we may spend another week on absolute, because we didn't really talk about a lot about absolutism tonight. Do y'all go ahead and let me know, do y'all want absolutism to be the focus? And of course, that includes constitutionalism and stuff. Do y'all want that to be the focus of next week's session as well? Okay, because it sounds like a lot of the questions that I got today were a lot of the questions I got today were based on the Reformation. So I think that would probably be a good idea to focus on have absolutism as our primary focus. Okay, that seems to be kind of a consensus around that. Totally fine with that. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, thank y'all for a great session. Now, remember, if you're here because you got Fiveable for Teachers, some of you are here because your teacher got you in, like they purchased Fiveable for Teachers and all of their students are in. Some of you may have subscribed to Fiveable. Now, I'm not sure. I do these sessions for Fiveable, but I don't run the company. So just want to make sure that y'all know. I don't know when these weekly sessions will start being for subscribers only, or if some of them will or whatever. Like right now, they're still, as far as I know, they're all open to the public. But make sure if you're a student and you've been coming here and you found it helpful and you don't have, you don't already have a subscription either through yourself or your teacher, that you go to fiveable.me or fiveable.me. Oh, thank you, Emily, for coming, and I'm glad to help you. So fiveable.me and take a look, because at some point there are going to be at least some sessions that are going to be for subscribers only. So y'all want to make sure that you do have a subscription. I think right now you can get a subscription for the rest of the year, if I'm not mistaken. Don't quote me on this, but I think it's only like $15. And later on, like in the spring, when people are willing to pay more, it's actually going to be more. But this is like a chance to kind of get on, and then you'll have access to Fiveable for the rest of the year for one low price. So consider that. Take a look at fiveable.me. Also, Fiveable has a YouTube channel where I've been, and I need to get back to posting stuff on my actual YouTube channel, but I've been trying to build up this Fiveable channel. So youtube.com/think Fiveable. Okay, so just make sure that you're checking out all that stuff, and I will be back next week at 9 o'clock on Wednesday, and I look forward to seeing all of you. Remember, everyone, this year is Fiveable.